Hey guys, welcome back to another video. If this is your first time here, welcome. Thanks for checking us out. As the name implies, it is Aperture to Zoom, where we're going to cover in its entirety everything pertaining to videography and photography. So consider subscribing and following along for the journey. Today's video is going to be around getting a time lapse underway and what are our options as it pertains to the Panasonic Lumix G9. I suppose other cameras will be very similar, but I'm going to run through the settings and some important considerations to make before you get your time lapse underway. So hopefully the result will be something special. So look, stay tuned, and without any further ado, let's jump into the old video. Thank you. So I prepared a little time lapse earlier, which I'll just show you now. It's not very long, just to illustrate. And as you can see there, it's a 5-second time lapse of a little, just a roundabout near my house here. Actually, I'm recording from the balcony. But the noticeable thing I want to point your attention to is these bars on the side of the video, which is not really ideal. So I'm going to run through why those bars are there, and that is the first. And what is the first step in us getting rid of those and fixing that? Okay, so I've plugged the G9 directly into my computer here, and I'm sharing the screen with you, so you can see what the menu is like. It's just pointing to my kitchen. Thank God that's clean. Now, typically, we know that when we shoot our photos, we like our setting to be on RAW, right, which it is down there. And we also like our aspect ratio to be 4.4:3, which is the sort of native setting of the Panasonic Lumix G9. So the reason why we have those bars on the side is because of the aspect ratio. So I'm going to run through a few things that you must consider changing when you set up your time lapse so that you can increase the chance of getting a really awesome time lapse. First thing is go to your aspect ratio and change that to 16:9. And then it's not really necessary to shoot in RAW unless you're a time lapse professional, which I've seen videos, some people are, they do shoot in RAW and then they don't let the camera do the in-house processing of the video, which I'll show you in a minute. But I typically just change it to JPEG for time lapses. I keep the picture size as large. Photo style is up to you. You can change it to standard, vivid, natural, monochrome, whatever. I typically, to be fair, I've just left that on standard. There isn't a huge amount of, there isn't any other settings that you can change in here. And to get to your time-lapse settings, just scroll to page 4. In the menu, hit the time-lapse button. Now you're getting to your time-lapse shot. You do have the option between stop motion animation or time-lapse. You do have the option of getting it to start now, which is what I've used most of the time, or you can choose a date and time that you want it to start. I typically don't. I just go now, and then let's just go back again. And then it comes down to our actually I need to go set to now. There we go. And then we got our shooting intervals, which we can also change to our hot content. When it comes to intervals, you could go anything up to 10, 20, a minute, whatever, how long you want to shoot the intervals between shots. Then you can also change your image count from 1 to 9,999. So that gives us our time-lapse animation. And then there's a few other settings I want to run through, which I think is very important. So we'll get stuck into those right now. Okay guys, so at this juncture I'd like to just jump through onto the camera here and show you what things we really need to change on the camera. First up, if we're heading to time-lapse on our mode dial over here, we got to move all the way over to the very last setting. That moves it to time-lapse. Okay. The next thing you want to do is make sure our focus is set to manual focus. This is very, very important because the last thing we want the camera to be doing is hunting for focus during the time lapse. As the exposure changes, we need that focus to be steady. In addition to the focus being steady, we need the exposure to be steady. And the way we're going to be doing that is, actually I might as well put this thing on, put the camera on, is also change our dial on top here to aperture mode. So now we can just focus on setting our aperture right, and then once we've got our aperture right, we are good to go. Another thing to consider in the very front of the camera is our electronic shutter button, which I would highly encourage you to use. And as you can see, the little E pops up on the screen there, exposure, I beg your pardon, electronic shutter. If you do have automatic focus on your lens, like I think I have, if I just bring the camera, can I bring the camera up? No, because the thing, actually I might just take it off here, that might just get, if we do have automatic focus on the actual lens, make sure that's moved to manual. Image stabilization can stay on, that's all good to go, so no drama there. So look, those are sort of the main settings that we've got to look at when we get our time lapse ready. If there's anything else that I've missed, I will be sure to mention that before we end. Okay guys, so now we got our camera set up, we've changed our aspect ratio, we've moved it to, we've changed the setting to JPEG. I'll run through the settings in a minute, but I'm just going to run through a little checklist, which I'll bring up on the screen here, so that we can make sure before we set our time lapse to play, we've done everything right. Let's go over it again. 16:9 aspect ratio, JPEGs, all right? Make sure the camera is set to manual focus. If you do have it on the manual focus button on the lens, make sure that's also set to manual focus. Make sure you've got the electronic shutter switched on. It's a lot better on your camera. Put on focus peaking, because when you're in manual, it's good to know that you are in focus. Set your priority to your shutter to aperture priority, and let's have a look at what that looks like when I do put those settings in place and then run a time lapse. Okay, so this is a time lapse I did a little earlier. It's only 5 seconds long, but pretty much using the settings that I mentioned a minute ago. And as you can see, it's only taken at 2-second intervals, but it certainly looks a hell of a lot better than the ones with the bars on the side. All right, I want to wrap this video up because it's getting on a little bit. So I've got a few time lapses that I'm going to just put in here. First one being the one that clearly shows the bars on the side. That's the first one I did. And that's the one that you really want to avoid. That's when that aspect ratio is set to 4:3. The next one's pretty much exactly the same shot. Only difference is the aspect ratio was 9, is now 16:9, which is giving us a much better format and video. This one I did some time ago, also using very, very similar settings. And as you can see with the clouds there, or mist or fog or whatever it is, if you have something like that, it can really produce a very, very nice effect in video. I also did this one with some clouds. Also a really, really nice effect. It is, depending on what that subject matter is, you need to really choose the interval properly and then the amount of photos and play around with the frame rate and so forth. It all takes a lot of experimentation. On the Lumix cameras, you also have the miniature mode setting. So miniature mode plus plus a time lapse can give you quite a nice effect. I think that one's a bit short. This one may be a little better, also just 5 seconds long. But yeah, that's miniature mode plus time lapse. And you can see there's not a huge amount of flicker or anything like that. So look guys, I hope that gives you some idea as to the dynamics around time lapse. It is a case of experimenting with the different intervals, with the different volumes of pictures. Try to avoid using RAW, else you can have copious amounts of size photos. So keep it to JPEG, set that aspect ratio right, and then just play around with it, have fun, make sure you follow those prompts. If there's anything important that I've forgotten, because I'm still learning this process, something that I would really like to improve on, and I'm going to be making maybe turn this into a regular time-lapse segment where I can share what my findings are with you guys as it pertains to the Lumix G9. Thank you very, very much for watching. Aperture to Zoom is the name, as I mentioned. Please consider subscribing, like this video if you've got something out of it, and we will no doubt catch up in the next one. Over and out. Bye-bye.